see that our flat Nick and Jim are out there? And, oh, God, I think it's Rob. He put masks on them.
I did see that.
That's good.
From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. You can submit your questions anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. It's been another crazy week in America. I kind of feel like somebody has one of those monkey's paws and was wishing for us to forget about coronavirus for a little bit. And now, broadcasting from the churn, that guy's Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
So as you guys are hearing this, it is Wednesday or Thursday, and we record on a Sunday, and here into this weekend, there has been a huge protesting and in some cases rioting response.
You may have heard about it.
You may have heard about it, and I'm sure and I hope that it's calmed down by the time you're finally hearing this.
This is why we tend to avoid current events.
Yeah, because if whatever's hot, it's going to be a news cycle,
Right.
past whenever we talk about it. But we still think that this is super duper relevant because there is deep psychological aspects to this, and it shows up in therapy a lot. The experience of the African American community or people of color, the experience of law enforcement officers and what, when they get stuck in the middle of this. We get to meet the entire spectrum of people, all the way up to people that you might call a white supremacist. And, we're the person that still has to treat that person. A surgeon doesn't get to screen out people he's going to pull a bullet out of, based on their beliefs or their values, their religion, or their political views. He's just a healthcare provider. And that's our job, too. And so, from us, when we were thinking about this storyline and what was happening, it was very profound because we've treated a lot of folks that have taught us a lot about their human experience. And I think that's relevant. I think that there's something there for us to unpack, something there for us to reflect on and discuss from a therapeutic angle that can be educational and that can teach everybody a little bit more about some of this human experience from an angle that they don't just hear about on the news.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, we kind of talked a little bit about it in the pre-show, but just the idea that from my experience that I can't relate to something. Mm-hmm. And as a therapist, that's one of the things that we try to do is we try to be empathetic. And part of that is trying to put ourselves in that position and understand what the individual's going through. Mm. But to a large degree, we're never going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
As much as we want to try to imagine what it's like to be in that person's position,
right?
We still, to some degree, have to come to the conclusion that we can't. We can empathize, we can try to see it from someone's perspective, but we're not going to feel it.
Right.
We're not actually going to know it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, something that I've kind of learned just watching the news cycle and how everything has been going through and just trying to figure out, like, how would I react in that situation and what would that be like?
And I think that's what distinguishes, I think, a therapeutic mind. As what I mean by that is a therapist. In our discipline, we are trained very heavily to think a certain way, and that way is curiosity. And so whenever we see stuff like this, I think we are human and we can be shocked and horrified. I think we can have very strong opinions about social justice and the way that things go. But I think we're also very deeply inclined to ask that question of the officer who actually killed George Floyd is on suicide watch, and his wife is divorcing him, and she's already filed, and he's in prison now or wherever they're holding him, and there's a huge bail. And even though he is public enemy number one right now, I'm very curious about his humanity. I'm very interested in, I wonder what he's personally going through right now. What was going through his mind? What is his human story? How did the events of his life and the perspectives that he grew up with and that wove into his time ultimately result in this action that will forever change his life?
And that is an interesting perspective as a therapist, because I think we've both been through situations like that where we have worked with somebody who, on a philosophical level or belief system, we completely disagree with.
Right.
But we still have to work with that individual and to try to be naturally curious but not allow judgment to get in the way of the therapeutic relationship is really tough. And a lot of folks, a lot of therapists don't do that. A lot of therapists will say, I just don't feel comfortable working with this person, and they'll make a referral someplace else.
Right. Yeah.
I try not to do that as much as I can. If I feel like I can't do my job, then I do.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I work really hard to try to be naturally curious.
Yeah.
Even if I completely disagree with everything that person believes in.
Yeah.
But still try to look at them as
that's the training. That's professionalism.
And it takes a long time to.
It does, and I'm sure if you're a
that.
surgeon and they wheel in a guy who just, let's say, shot a teenager, and he was in a firefight, and he's an adult, and he did kill somebody, and he's a horrific person or a terrorist or whatever just happened, and your job is to save that guy's life. Yeah. I hope that you're professional enough that you can do your trade, with that human. But for our trade, it's very difficult because we do have to interact with some really interesting thoughts. So as I prepared for this, what I wanted to bring to the table as far as the A-block segment in reaction to this, I wanted to reflect for a moment, doing almost a case study on 2 patients that I've seen. And then I wanted to add a third story, which is a professional in our valley who works alongside of us, who has a very different view of how we as therapists should be addressing this problem than I do. Oh. And I want to share that view, but I also want to offer why I don't agree with it and why I don't go that well.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I actually did some homework to prepare for this.
Holy shit. Look at you go.
Thanks, man.
Did you do it because of the show, or did you just do it and you were like, oh, hey, this might be good on the show?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, that's all.
Oh.
Let me find some motivation here.
I tried to dig deep in my well of motivation.
I was getting all excited. I was like, look at our little Jimmy.
He's all grown up trying. Look at him trying. I don't even care how it turns out. Good job, buddy. Way to show up. Yeah. You actually looked at the script before you walked in. Good job.
That all makes sense.
I try. So here's 3 stories. So the first story is a patient who was and is, but it is a long time ago. So none of these patients are current. None of these experiences are current. They're from deep in the career. But a patient who was one of my first African-American patients. This was something that I got to do at a program that you and I once worked at. That was state budgeted. It was something that we were funded by the state. And so we were receiving a lot of folks who were coming out of prison. And, they were, being asked to come to our program and stay with us for a long time sometimes. This was up on the mountain. And so they would stay with us for, at this particular program, they could stay a long time. Sometimes it's like 60, 90 days, in some cases, and some rare cases really longer. And this individual was a gang member. And, here I was, a new therapist. This is my first assignment. I'm a suburban white guy. I didn't come from money. I didn't come from middle classiness. I've had aspects of my human story that were in that category. And then I also had aspects in that story that were homelessness, and on the edge of poverty. And so I've met lots of swaths of humanity across the spectrum throughout that time. And I've lived in lots of different states. So I feel like I'm pretty good at knowing humanity. And I usually feel pretty competent. And then in our training, there's a lot of multicultural competency that we have to do because we're supposed to fill in those blind spots. Right. But I felt completely unprepared whenever I met the person. And he was a sweet person and very, very charming and all smiles, big old smile on his face. And he was this huge, 6'8", just jacked, big old dude. But he was a silly guy and playful and really silly and just the sweetest guy. And as I sit down to hear his story, I'm talking to this guy who is sweet and kind. And then he explains to me that he's a Crip. And I'm like, Crip, like the gang members? And he's like, yes, like the gang members too. And I'm like, isn't that bad? And he's like, well, what do you think about that? And I'm like, well, that sounds scary. It sounds like the people on the news that are bad people. And, but I didn't obviously say it this way, but this is what's going on in the context. Obviously I'm sitting here learning from the person. Right. And he's explaining to me why he joined a gang. And he's explaining about the options that he had in life, the way that people were going to hurt him and his family, the way that they didn't have access to jobs, the way that, he failed out of high school and what was going on in that, realm, and ultimately the pressure he got socially to be a part of something to make money for his family. And so it's basically a crime syndicate, but it's also this fraternity of protection. And there is this, assertion of protection. And so I learned so much about his human experience and understanding it. And through that, I came to see him as so much more of a human being rather than just a man who's a gang member. He's the sweetest guy. But I also came to understand that he had been through a lot in his life. And one of the things that he taught me that was most profound was the deep, deep distrust he had for police officers. and in the story of that. And of course, for me, it's checking all of my biases, because I'm like, you're a gang member. Gang members are scary, but you're like the sweetest guy in the world. Like, I would totally give you the keys to my car and have you like pick up my kids. Like, you're just the nicest guy. And then like he's explaining the abuse.
That's
that
a
he had
weird
gone
reation
through.
to have to anybody when you first meet them.
Yeah, I'm
Go
very
pick up my
generous.
kids.
Hey, what are you doing this afternoon? You mind swinging by the daycare and grabbing my daughter? Should just tell her you're with me. It's fine. So
That's a weird response, no matter how well you know this person.
Very generous guy.
Which,
Just trust
considering
people.
you put a tent around your pool to protect them from bees,
and
I
UV rays.
question everything that you're saying
and
right now.
UV rays.
But go on.
So he taught me so much about his lived experience dealing with police. And of course, when you first hear the stories, you're like, well, of course you're being harassed by police. You're a gang member. But he's trying to explain to me, like, gang membership is not like you joined like this huge like official thing, you know, like, no, it's just an affiliation. Like, people know that I'm in it, and the people that need to know, and like, that's it, and they don't hurt me, you know, things like that. And, you know, it's a very loose affiliation. But he's explaining throughout his life how at a very young age he experienced encounters with the police in his neighborhood as he was a young man just starting to drive and things like that, that deeply, deeply turned him against this idea that there is a right and wrong. He didn't look at it as the cops are right and we're wrong. He looked at it as we're all taking care of our own.
Right.
And that's all this is.
Yeah.
And you can put on pretty uniforms and shiny stars, but at the end of the day, we're all just taking care of our own. And he had a very raw view of that. And what wasn't even a resentful view. He was explaining it to me like, totally fine, Jim. You know, the cops are here to protect the white people, and we're here to protect each other. And that's just what we do. And I was just like, wow. And it was a very profound thing, because it ripped away a lot of my illusions at the time that just society works the way it's supposed to work, and that gang members are bad and police are good. It was like he was taking me into the complexity of his lived experience.
Right.
And the trauma of that he had gone through really, really was illuminating, and realizing the things he had seen and the ways that, and then you realize that, and obviously as therapists, you start to work with police officers at some point too, and you realize how human they are. And you realize that they're not these, you know, pinnacles of society, these robots that can do no harm. They are human beings who get scared, who see violence all the time. They're very deeply traumatized. A lot of them develop really bad coping skills like alcoholism and personal violence and things like that, because they are a human being who's subjected to a lot of scary stuff. And without, you know, proper self-care and proper maintenance, a lot of humans can be really hurt by that. And then you realize how many hurting people are swirling around in our society. There's police officers interacting with my patient who are hurting people because they are hurting. And then these people that have been hurt by these police officers go off and hurt other people with a sense of carelessness because they are hurting. And round the cycle of pain goes. And that was one of the first big takeaways I had from that patient's experience.
Wow.
I'll tell you, a good friend of mine, he's an African-American man. He's a little bit younger than me, but not much. It's the same age bracket as I am. And he is a conspiracy theory guy.
Mm-hmm.
And in talking to him, he's one of two brothers that I see pretty often. And the two brothers and I, we would sit and we would talk. And one of the brothers and myself would just make fun of this guy relentlessly for believing in these conspiracy theories.
That doesn't sound like you, Jim.
Yeah, I know. This is a different side of me that you don't see very often.
It was a different time.
Yeah. This is months ago.
Yeah. It was a different guy back then.
Yeah. And so we would just sit and make fun of this guy, and he finally explained to us why he believes in these conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And it was very simply the government, and when he says the government, in large part he means the police, have fucked me over and over again, and the government lies to me when they're fucking me over. And so I don't believe anything the government tells me.
Wow.
So if the government tells me that we landed on the moon, I assume that they are lying.
And and you realize it's a perspective formed through pain.
Yeah. And so his perspective is the government lies to me. Anything the government tells me is probably a lie. So I'm going to go ahead and look into anything that they tell me and go from a place of assumption that they are lying.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so like that led him to being a conspiracy theory guy.
Right. And that's the same kind of thing that wove into this patient's story, because he had been raised to distrust that institution, law enforcement especially. He had gone to jail. He had been pinned with things he didn't do. He had been put in situations where he had to survive, but then he's being charged. And there's just all this complexity. And it just resulted in this deep, deep distrust between him and the system. And I saw him as this human being. And obviously, you know, it was a very specific example in my career because he, more than anybody I'd ever worked with up to that point, revealed to me a lot of the African American experience, the fear that he feels. And we had a police officer, you probably remember this gentleman, he used to come up to the mountain once a month, and he was anybody who had to have a parole officer, he was their designated parole officer.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy would scare the hell out of these people. And at the time, we kind of liked him because he kept everybody in order. And, like, you know, he was an asset.
He was a useful tool.
He was helpful to us because, you know, we're up in the middle of the mountains asking people to obey our little therapy rules. And he'd come up and go, if you don't, I'll take you down in cuffs. And they're like, yes, sir. You know, we're going to go to group and talk about our feelings now because we don't want to be punished. And so, like, it was helpful. But I would see the countenance of my patient change as soon as this guy's car rolled up the mountain. And it was visceral. And I'd see in his eyes. And he went from this big, smiley, huggy, jokey, best friend ever guy, just a teddy bear, to like one of the scariest men I've ever seen in my life. And he's just scowling. And whenever the police officer would tell everybody to round up and come in the cafeteria.
That's when you asked for the keys to your house back.
That's when I was like, hey man, can I get those keys? I just realized I left the stove on. I gotta run.
Where'd you leave my kids?
That was when I had that second thought. So like we go inside and like I can just see like how like standoffish he is and protective he is. And it's such an interesting thing because when I see a police officer, as you were reflecting in the pre-show, as a white man, when I see a police officer, I don't feel fear. I feel like I'm aware that human has a gun on them and that I don't, and that other humans are not walking around with the ability at any time to kill somebody. And I realize this human can, but I feel safe because I'm like, this human's highly trained to not kill me, and they're here to protect people. And if I'm not doing anything wrong, they have no interest in me whatsoever. I'm just background noise to them. They're just walking right past me. That is not how he felt.
Yeah.
Whenever he was in the presence of that police officer, he felt fear.
Yeah.
And that fear conditioned him to behave strong, to be off-putting and intimidating, because that is the only way that he could protect himself.
Well, and I think because it's survival. Instinct. You know, I think my survival instinct, because I didn't grow up that way, was conditioned differently.
Right.
You know, whereas if I'm in a situation where I feel like, you know, the other person has some sort of power, which could be authority, could be a weapon, could be whatever, then I do anything I can to not make myself appear like a threat.
Yeah.
So I slow down my movements. I kind of lower my voice. I calm down. I try to not make any sudden movements or anything like that.
Right,
you know, because I don't want to. Yeah, because I don't want to trigger fear. Because once you trigger that fear, then now it's all the amygdala that's driving the brain. It's not anything else, and then that's when you get those crazy reactions. But I think like in that situation, like, no, you're trained. Like, okay, this is a threat.
Right.
I know right away this is a threat.
Well,
this is all about survival.
Visually see him.
Yeah.
And so later on, as I built my relationship with this guy, I asked him about it. Like, hey man, I really noticed a different side of you in the way that you interacted with the police and all that stuff. And one day he finally, we had a breakthrough, and it was one of the most profound moments of my early career, where I said, I just don't get it, man. You're such a jovial and laughy and huggy and playful and teasing kind of guy. And then it's amazing how it switches over. And he looks at me and he said, Jim, I'm actually not that guy. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm not that jovial, playful, big white smile guy. I said, yeah, you are. That's how I've always seen you. And he said, I do that to you because you are a white man in power over me. And he said, that is one of my tricks. Because if I can read you really well, and I'm a lot bigger than you, and if I scare you, you're going to be able to cause problems in my life. So I put you at ease by being over the top playful with you, because you seem like a playful guy. And I just realized, like, my God, his whole life is adapting.
Yeah.
Because he cannot trust any person who, and he's earned that distrust. He's not a distrusting guy. He's a very well put together guy. It was just his life story. And he realized, even me, the guy who's supposed to be his therapist, I fell for the act. And it was one of the best he'd ever done, because he had to, because he can't trust anybody not to betray him or to screw him or to know anything. It was profound, man. It was a really profound. So that, for me, that gave me a lot of awareness and insight into this a little teeny tiny dot in the entire human story of the African American community, which I feel uncomfortable saying that phrase, because I feel like it's not a ubiquitous community. There's lots of humans, lots of places, experience lots of things. But as I watch these riots that have happened and the protests that have happened, I always see his face in my mind. And I think of him so fondly and as such a beautiful human being who had gone through so much pain. And I know that he would be out there, pushing against this because he just feels like he has no other choice. Anytime he has played the game of the system, it has betrayed him, it has hurt him, it has lied to him. It's like Jacob's friend, the conspiracy theorist. He's just been hurt too many times. And he feels like the only thing he has left, and at times in his life, the only thing he had left was violence. And that was the one tool that was still available sometimes to save his own life. It's profound.
Yeah.
So that was a really profound story for me. That was the first one, that patient that really revealed to me that side of the street. So now I want to tell you about the second patient.
Okay.
Second patient, middle-aged white guy in his 40s, military, and very much a supremacist. And this was a tricky one because as a therapist, whenever you're curious about somebody and you're asking them questions, you might hear something about them that is off-putting or something that you don't personally agree with. Mm-hmm. But we're highly trained to not make that an issue because that will shut the person down. If you say, yeah, I voted for Trump, and I'm like, oh, really? Trump's a fucking idiot. Well, there goes our therapeutic report. I wouldn't vote for Trump. So if somebody tells me their views about anything, if you polled all my patients and said, does Jim agree with you about little things? They would be like, yeah, Jim and I are a lot alike. And that's not actually true. Jim is a highly trained therapist. That's not being a liar. It's just never making my problems your problems. Like, if I don't like Trump, that's not my time to tell you that.
Right.
If you tell me you love him, I'm like, yeah, he's got a lot to like about him. What do you like about him? And they'll be like, oh, I just love that he's really good at business. I'm like, he is really good at business. And, that's all. We're just, I'm seeing your perspective, looking at things that you hand to me and go, wow, that's really interesting. Well, that's really difficult to do when you're talking to a white supremacist. As somebody who collects guns, for the apocalypse kind of thing, and very much has the view that, and this person was, I don't want to put networks and stuff on blast, but the person was very woven into Fox News that very much fed into their thinking. They had gone really deep down the rabbit hole of very specific news sites and very specific aspects of things. Now, this person was nonviolent. If you would have asked this person, hey man, do you have a plot? Are you going to hurt? He'd be like, whoa, no, I'm part of the government. I'm here to protect you. And that's how you would see this person. As a very kind, here to protect you, churchgoer, everybody's cool, no. But when you hear his deeper thoughts, it's very deeply influenced to feel a sense of hatred and anger toward them, which for him was Obama and all the Jesse Jacksons and all the people of the world that, try to take away the power. And he didn't necessarily see it as us and them. He didn't see it that clearly. But if you'd let him just talk, he'd eventually get to us and them. Oh. And if you asked him about it, he'd say, no, I don't see it as that. There's good people, it doesn't matter your race. But if you just let him free fall for a while, he'll eventually land on, listen, there's a black agenda, and they want to take away power. They want to demilitarize. They want to make us weak. Look at Obama. And just listen to it. And it would just be talking points from the darkest parts of, a very right-wing web. But it also wove into it weapons and preparedness. And I think that if there was a riot, if there was, right now it's the police generally versus the protesters. But he would be one of those guys dressed in gear, walking into the Capitol of a place with an AK-47 strapped to his chest and demanding something, from a governor and not expecting anybody to stand up to him and being completely fine with that. And if there were a clash, he'd be the guy on the other side of the line, the guy with the tiki torches in Charlottesville. That's who he was. Well, I got to work with this guy long enough that I watched him go through a transformative process where he eventually looked nothing like that original guy. And it was interesting because that was not part of my treatment plan.
Right.
We were just working on addiction. That was it. And this individual got to the end of my time with them, and that had fundamentally changed. And I'd asked him about it, because I like to read, when I'm wrapping up a case with somebody, especially if I work them for years, I like to read to them some of my original notes about them, to remind them what I first saw. And, I did that, and I said, you used to have a really strong perspective, politically and stuff. I said, you used to be a really angry guy. And he goes, dude, I was, and I was miserable. And he would talk to me about that and be like, I used to be so angry. And I said, well, what changed? He said, I stopped watching all that stuff on the news.
Huh.
And he said, I realized one day I couldn't do it anymore because I was so sad and so angry and so miserable. So I stopped, and I just started going to meetings, going to church, talking to nice people, making friends. And he said, I just suddenly stopped seeing people as Democrats and Republicans, or liberals and, good conservatives, or whatever he wanted to see, or, Trump, to use a Trump quote, thugs, and like the civilly obedient, whatever. He stopped seeing it that way. And especially going to the rooms and stuff, I think he just started encountering humans who were just like him. He's no different then, but they're very different, but he's no different. And so I got to see that.
He would have seen them as different earlier. If you described the person to him, he would have been like, "Oh, that person's very different than me."
Yes.
And then he goes and spends some time with them.
Yes.
No, this is just me through a different lens.
Yes, he started to see himself in others. And so it was interesting to watch that transformation process, where I would probably say he might describe himself. I don't think he would say the phrase white supremacist, but I think if you laid out the paradigms that make a person a white supremacist in a paragraph,
he checks
and
all
asked
the
him,
boxes.
yeah, how much of this sounds right to you? I think you go, yeah, this is pretty close. And then it's like, well, this is a white supremacist. What? No, that's not what it is. It's the conservative platform, or whatever. So it's interesting to kind of caricature both those people, where I got to see one who taught me a lot about his personal lived experience as a black man, and I got to see this other person who taught me a lot about where his hate was coming from, where his anger was coming from. And it was fascinating to me because it's like Jacob said, when you listen to the conspiracy, when you listen to the perspective, and you really try to understand your patient, because I don't try to correct, I don't try to tell you you're wrong, I just want to understand. It made so much. I don't want to say it made sense, because it wasn't the kind of sense that you'd march out into objective reality and have a community discussion about. It wouldn't hold up.
Right.
But inside of the echo chamber that he lived in, it 100% made sense.
Yeah.
Every word he said made sense.
Now, I think now's a good time to jump in, because I think a lot of folks who don't understand therapy or counseling would look into this and say, well, Jim, why would you, if somebody is rattling off stuff like that, why don't you jump in, and why don't you try to correct that and try to guide them someplace else? And I think the answer to that is because everything at first is built off of rapport. And I think this is a really good example. I think this happens often when once you've established rapport with somebody and you get them to that point where they start self-exploration, which is a big part of therapy, they start doing that themselves.
Right.
Just as in the case with this guy. He started questioning some of his own personal beliefs. He started questioning how he's getting that information. He's becoming self-aware of his emotions and things that trigger his emotions, and starting to make decisions on avoiding those things. And he's able to kind of work it out himself, which wouldn't happen without first establishing a rapport.
Right. And that was the thing that, this leads to actually the third story. So the third story is a professional who I've known in the community, and this is a therapist. It's also a therapist who's a person of color and is very, very passionate about addressing that and social justice issues, and has told me lots of stories about what it was like to kind of come up, and what it was like to go through her story. And so it's interesting because as I've heard her story, she's talked about systemic racism and obstacles and things that have shown up in her career that have gotten in the way, and so she's had a very interesting reaction to that, where she doesn't exclusively treat people of color, but she's very intentional to make that her caseload. And that's okay. That's great. Everybody has, a niche that they try to serve. That totally makes sense. But for her, it even goes a little bit further than that. It becomes a cause. And she and I have had some pretty in-depth conversations where she's explained, when you experience a patient like that, or anything in society, you have a social responsibility to confront these broken, toxic views and fix that. You cannot allow that to be. You have to be a challenger of that. You have to fix it. And that was such a pervasive view of hers that she believes that on every level, not just racism, but toxic masculinity. If a man is talking to you and he tells you about things in his relationship that if you exposed those exact quotes on Twitter, he would be, looked at as a monster, then you need to challenge those quotes. You need to challenge his frame of reference, and you need to fix that toxic masculinity. If you would think of him as selfish, you need to challenge that. If you think of him as entitled, you need to challenge that. If he has white privilege, you need to challenge that. And that was a very exclusive thing to her. She believed very strongly every single patient you have, and she would challenge me on this because she'd be like, Jim, you are a white man. You can do things that I cannot do. I'm like, okay, I accept that that's true. And she said, you have a responsibility that whenever you work with white people, which you may do a lot of sometimes, you have a responsibility to show them their white privilege and to challenge them to see it and to change it and to engage with it. And if you are not doing that, you are not doing your job. And so that was her perspective. And there is a debate in our field about whether that is a view that you should adopt, whether therapists are fundamentally supposed to be social changers and especially if you come from a social work background,
then the answer is yes.
The answer is a big yes. So I don't feel that way. And so my view, and I'm totally open to her views on this, and she teaches me her thoughts, and I try not to offer her my thoughts because I don't think that that's what our conversation is. I think I'm there to learn, and I think my thoughts might be misinterpreted and cause pain, and I don't want anything I say to cause pain, so I receive from her. But privately, when I think about whether or not I'm going to do the things that she's asked me to do, I think no. And the reason I think no is because I don't see that as my job. I am a individual healthcare provider. I am not the mayor of a city. I am not the epidemiologist and guy who decides cultural norms inside of our system. I am one provider. You walk into my office and you tell me what's wrong with you, and if I notice that you seem a little entitled along the way, or if I notice that you have toxic views, like this gentleman who literally was military assault rifle-y and talking about how somebody just probably should have popped a cap in Obama, obviously I'm not, I don't know, I don't see that as now I need to jump in and say, you know what, you're being a racist. Or obviously you wouldn't be that confrontational about it, but I just don't feel like that's part of my treatment plan. Like the third item on my treatment plan is not address systemic injustice and white privilege perspectives. That's not what we're here to do.
That's further down the list or higher on the list?
It's not number 3.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's an interesting thing to kind of contemplate is like, what is our job in this? Should we be change agents, on this like society-wide level? Should we be catching these perspectives and showing them to people and saying, look, you're wrong? I don't feel like I should do that. Because I think it's also very entitled of me to try to do that. We're taught not to do no harm, like here to fix things, not here to challenge. That would be imposing my philosophies on the patient. I'm a progressive dude. So if I start imposing my progressive philosophy on the patient, it's invalidating their worldview, which is way deeper than what we're here to do.
Yeah.
I'm here to help you with your anxiety.
Right.
I'm here to help you with your depression. I'm here so you don't kill yourself. Like, that needs to be my role.
Yeah, I would agree in the sense that, your job isn't to pass off your belief system, your ideology, because then that has an understanding, a fundamental baseline that your belief system is correct.
Right.
Right. Whereas
it assumes that I'm right.
Why would you assume you're right? I think my philosophy on that is therapy is all about self-exploration.
Right.
I think that happens naturally if you continue to build rapport and you continue to challenge thought processes on everything, not just on toxic masculinity or political ideology or race or any of that. I think as the person becomes more insightful, they start questioning that. And I don't think you are in the driver's seat. Right. I think you're a passenger. I think you're a navigator. And I think they choose to look at those things. And I think it will happen naturally, but I don't think you have to force it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So as we were talking, you said something earlier about the role of the therapist. I'm very Rogerian in this answer. And so for those of you who are students out there and studying this trade, Carl Rogers is one of the greatest psychotherapists who ever lived. He won a Nobel Peace Prize. He's actually been brought into mitigating conflicts on a global scale, like where there's been war. He's been one of the people negotiating to bring peace because he is that damn good.
Right. Also invented the Ford Mustang.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Jesus. He is a very accomplished man.
Yes.
Known as the hedgehog in the porno industry.
So Carl Rogers also wrote a few books, and one of his books talks about the way to be a therapist, and it's a manual for that. And here's a quote. It's one of the quotes that I've really always appreciated that he wrote about, and I just wanted to read it out loud because I think for me, it justifies why I take the perspective I do about it's not my job to change somebody's white nationalism or challenge anything. You could have said with my first patient, the African-American gentleman who had perceptions that crime in some ways is justified because the system is broken. Well, I could have said, hey, philosophically, I disagree with that. I believe in law and order in society. And even though you've been through a lot of trauma and sad things in your life, you need to, not do crime anymore and realize, obviously I'm going to help him not to be self-destructive.
Right.
That's healthy.
Yes.
But, I'm not going to say you're wrong about the system.
Because what you do at that point is you put him on that side and you on the other, and then you're no longer connected.
And look at how hard it already was for us to bridge that gap.
Right.
He was lying to me the whole time with his personality. So the most important thing I can do is connect. So here's what Rogers said. He said, the therapist, at his best, does not suggest, advise, or persuade. He does not assume responsibility for the client's decisions. Instead, he encourages the individual, now more clearly aware of his true feelings, and with more acceptance of his total self, to take the responsibility for making new choices. Often hesitantly, often fearfully, the client does so, and is cheered and encouraged by the fact that he finds he can successfully take responsibility for himself and can direct his energies toward new, self-chosen goals. So that comes back to internal locus of control. That comes back to non-directive posturing in therapy. I am directive if there's a problem. I am directive. You come into me and say, I have anxiety. I'm like, you're going to work the gym program. It's going to be my program. I'm going to show you how to do it. You're going to do what I tell you to do, and I'm going to fix you. That's directive, right? But with a lot of these cases, I'm non-directive, especially if you're revealing things along the way about your worldview, and if I think that's not correct or wrong, I don't feel it's my role to step in and do that. I feel that I'm here not to challenge and persuade you that I'm right and you're wrong, to help you be non-self-destructive, to give you the space to encounter your truth. And usually if you give people that space to talk it out and you ask strategic questions, they bump into why those are dysfunctional views anyway. In both cases, the clients came from toxic perspectives, and in both cases, through engaging with a therapist, their views were developed and grown and broadened, and they ultimately changed a little bit. And I think that that's a win.
Yeah.
And both cases, they were dealing with addiction, and in both cases, they were successful. And ultimately, I think that makes them more wholesome, better human beings, even if they're still going to go through the story of life. Yeah. So a little bit of 3 stories there to sort of match against what's going on in current context and hopefully contribute something.
Yeah. Yeah. Answering the questions that you guys didn't ask.
And also, big plug for the Ford Mustang. Still not a... And also, Just for Men decided not to sponsor the show, even though I tagged them out on social media.
I saw that.
Jerks.
Yeah, and they responded, but the answer was no.
No.
That's a hard no.
That's a hard no, Jim. I'm used to it. All right, well, we are going to take our first break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about a question about medications. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's Theraproducer sponsor is Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop. Today's first trivia question in honor of Theraproducer Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop is... currently ranked number 1 in the world golf rankings, this golfer from Northern Ireland is a 4-time major champion, and along with Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus, is one of 3 players to have won 4 majors by the age of 25.
You golfed today, didn't you?
I did. I golfed this morning before the show. So if you'd like to join Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop and make the show possible, you can go to patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Thanks. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy.
He also has the most Irish sounding name.
He does.
Does he?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Yes.
Okay, the only golfer...
Short of Seamus.
As Irish as you can get right before you hit Seamus.
Yeah.
That's the edge of the Irish. I'm actually really interested in this answer.
It's now. Irish McIrishy.
Yeah. His name is Dublin McIreland.
Sean Potato.
Yeah, it's pretty Irish. Oh my God. So the only golfer who I really, really like is Arnold Palmer.
It's not him.
And it's specifically because I like iced tea and lemonade.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I do like iced tea and lemonade.
I assume he's also a golfer, but I mostly like his brand.
I mean, he's most well known for the iced tea lemonade.
I like it.
I mean, he's played some good golf.
How many golfers have really changed my life? One.
Right.
Arnold Palmer.
Arnold Palmer.
He cools me down on a hot summer day. None of the rest of them even come close. Good morning, guys. I've written in a few times. I have a 15-year-old daughter who wants to be a boy. I will refer to him. He's pretty set on that, but I won't let him do anything to his body until he is 18 for the sake of I don't want to mess with his body while he's still growing and maturing, and also because he's going to figure out how to pay for all that. When I've written in before, I referred to this as my daughter. He was in a mental health facility in October for 6 days. When he came home, it was probably the best of us because it opened up amazing doors for a great therapist who specializes in transgender work and is a psychiatrist. He's been on a form of Prozac and buspirone. About 2 weeks ago, the doctor increased his dosage for both medications. Since then, he has been having insane nightmares, delusions, and hearing voices. After finally hearing back from the doctor yesterday, he said to stop all meds immediately and take him to the mental health facility to be evaluated. They stated their intention was not for him to stay, but to be evaluated. At the facility, he had to be checked in and then seen by the doctor, and they can keep him or send him somewhere else or release him. I guess my biggest question is, this seems to have come when the medication changed. Do you know if the meds can somehow mess with a person and make them have delusions? I guess I just don't understand it. Thanks, guys. Really enjoy the podcast and all the advice. Anonymous.
Okay. Good question.
We got into that a little bit last week with John.
Yeah.
With just medications making you suddenly feel things.
He wanted to jump out of a building.
Yeah.
And then he called his
or
doctor.
Didn't want to jump out of a building,
Believed
but
it was
suddenly
a good idea.
woke up and thought like, oh, I should jump out of the building.
Right.
I should jump off of this building.
This makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, or picking spiders out of his shoes. And those were related to medicines both times. I mean, in
Right.
one case he was abusing them, but, you know, in the other time it was his, very powerful experiences in the medicines he was on. And yeah. So in this case, sounds like that's what they're dealing with too.
Yeah. I mean, I know one of the side effects of buspirone is nightmares.
Yeah.
So it's not one of the more common side effects, but it is a side effect that has been noted in some of the research. As far as the what was she saying? The
Prozac.
no, not the delusions. I guess, I mean, depending on how you define delusions. I mean, you're going to have some thoughts, like Jacob said, with John's example,
Right.
of just, for whatever reason, just feel like I need to do this. The delusions, I guess I'm not very familiar with the Prozac.
No, I mean, I don't think so. Okay. Yeah, the obvious variable that has changed here is medicine, right? And so if this patient in no way had any of these symptoms ever, and then you introduce Prozac and buspirone, and then now but that's the thing. These reactions seem really big for literal SSRI, Prozac, and buspirone.
Right.
I mean, Prozac is an SSRI. That is the Tylenol of mental health. It is your basic antidepressant, anti-anxiety med. I don't know that I've ever heard of that big of a reaction to it. I've seen discomfort. I've seen a little bit of anxiety. I've seen, ironically, because it's there to treat anxiety, I've seen some people, have little side effects, but, nausea, but never something on this level. And even with buspirone, I really just don't anticipate these kinds of symptoms. But obviously, that's the variable. Obviously, that's the big thing that changed. And so you look at that and go, well, clearly that must be the smoking gun. And so, I mean, the real question that the writer's asking about is, whenever you have a patient who has, insane nightmares, it's a symptom, but it's not something we diagnose with. We do not look at except in cases of PTSD, we do not look at nightmares as valuable data to us, except that the human is suffering and their mind is wandering. And there's lots of meds like trazodone or Seroquel that might help with that. And, again, we do not make medical advice recommendations on this show. We're just an educational show, but I'm just opining on what I've seen in the past, right? But the parts that are actual symptoms, delusions, and to remind the majority of listeners, when you have what we call psychotic features, that word psychotic scares a lot of people because they think it's like evil clown stuff. But no, it's just a medical term. And psychosis or psychotic features just means you're hearing things that aren't there or you're seeing things that aren't there. And usually those are hallucinations. A delusion is a little bit different. A delusion is not I'm hearing something that's not there or seeing something that's not there. A delusion is a perspective. They're out to get me. It's paranoia sometimes, or it's this celebrity loves me. Oprah's winking at me when it's specifically me. It's I can't trust you. You're all against me. You're not here for me.
It kind of has to. I mean, it's like beliefs.
It's a belief. Yeah, it's a deeper belief.
Right.
It goes back to John's example from the last show where John was saying, I had a delusional idea that jumping out of a window made sense. Like that was a good choice.
Is it so in the mind of the person, there are things that they feel that they can prove. So they might see something, and so they feel that they can prove that thing exists. It might not be there. It might be a hallucination, but they can really point at it and say that exists. So could a delusion possibly be something that they feel is true, but something that they can't necessarily prove?
It is similar to that. Yeah.
Okay.
Like a hallucination, most patients will tell you, I'm aware this isn't real. I'm aware that the voices aren't real. I'm aware, but it also kind of doesn't matter. Because your experience is real.
Right.
If I see a constant scary thing jumping out at me, being able to tell you I know that that's not real does not protect me from the jump take.
Still scares me every time.
It still scares me, and it causes me to have pain.
Have you ever done the experience where you put earphones in and then you actually listen to the voices.
Jesus. Yeah.
I did that at a training once when I was a graduate student.
Yeah.
And we actually had to, like, for the assignment, what we had to do is we had to go out into the union, the student union, and, like, ask people directions, like, where's the bathroom? And we had certain things. Yeah, and it was hard.
Oh my
and
God.
even, like, knowing that it's not real, obviously it's just an audio that I'm listening to.
Right.
But it's hard just to interact with people.
I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And so for me, I quickly had to take them off because I was feeling like I was going to lose my grip. Because like these voices, the ones that we were trained with were prosecutory. They were hurtful,
ours were
hateful.
too.
Yeah, and it's just like scary. You're horrible.
Yeah.
You know, we're coming for you, you piece of shit. You know,
Yeah.
and like really, really scary things. It's like, God, I can't do this. Like I had to stop because I was like, I'm done. Like I tap out. You guys win. I'm going to help people. Yeah, you guys can give them medicine. But you know, this is a situation where the patient's having delusions. We don't know what those are, but it's false perceptions of reality, not hallucinating something, perceiving reality in yourself incorrectly, and usually in a self-harmful or destructive way. We're all seeing nightmares. That's, again, not a symptom. But then the third thing, hearing voices. So when we're hearing voices, we consider that a psychotic feature, okay? Something's not happening. You're perceiving that it is. Your senses are not working accurately. Is that a side effect of Prozac or buspirone? Boy, I think you'd have to stretch. I think you'd have to really stretch. There'd have to be a chemical problem going on with the person and a mismatch with the medicine. I defer to the psychiatrist treating. Yeah. But, you know, I think that psychiatrist is going to screen for everything.
Yeah.
You know, and might be noticing at 15 years old some kind of schizophrenia. Yeah. That might be what's happening, is that this child is 15. They are now developing into the age range where we might be catching some of these features. And that might be what you're actually seeing. It might not be a medicine
Could
thing.
be. Could be. I mean, honestly, I think your best route is to continue working with your psychiatrist. You absolutely
did the right thing.
And also just being very open and report everything that happens, right? The more information your psychiatrist has, the better. The other thing, too, that I want to comment on is, you know, going back into the hospital, because a lot of times people will look at that as some kind of a failure.
Right.
Of something went wrong and that we got to start all over again.
Right.
People have that perspective of going to an inpatient psychiatric setting. And that's not really the case.
No.
The way that they did it, I think, was really good. It's almost kind of like, okay, bring the car back into the shop.
Yeah.
You know, it's safe in here. Let us take a look at it.
Yes.
And then we'll get it fixed and get you on your way again.
Yes.
That's a really good use of an inpatient psychiatric
100%. And I think that, writer, is the thing that we definitely want to signal back to you. You 100% handled that correctly.
Yeah.
Like, faced with these, you know, new features, faced with new symptoms, you reported it, you partnered with a strong therapist and a strong psychiatrist. They're monitoring the meds. They're working well with your teenager. First off, you are one of the lucky ones to even have a good team like that. A lot of times it's very hard to find a good duo. Like, you might find a good therapist, but then you struggle to find a good psychiatrist. You might find a decent psychiatrist, but then it's hard to find a really good therapist. And that therapist specifically specializes in transgender, you know, experiences. Wow. So, like, this is a great recipe. Lean in. Mm-hmm. Don't look at this as things going wrong. Look at this as more data. As Nick often says, don't look at it as something's, you know, it's just data.
It's just information.
Just information. Learn from it. Give that information to the team. Let them try to work out the medicine. Obviously, we're not going to make any medicine recommendations, not even our scope. We don't even do that. Until Nevada actually wrote that emergency order expanding all of our scopes indefinitely. So I've also opened up an OBGYN clinic, too. You guys should swing by.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll get you a mammogram, get you out of there real quick.
Cool.
But, yeah. So anyway, Ryder, good luck.
Trying to think of a place I'd like to go to less than
and what
OBGYN.
And what'd you come up with?
OBGYN,
Nothing?
optometry, hair care, and tire and lube.
The one-stop shop.
I got it all.
Quite a list.
Yeah. I just, trying to diversify, man. These are uncertain times.
Yeah, since our scope has been lifted, I'm now an airline pilot.
That's pretty cool.
So,
how's that going?
Great.
Yeah, just phone not ringing a lot, but waiting on the bench. Yeah. So great job, Ryder. I think you're handling it exactly right. And, no comment on the transgender aspect of things. I don't think you asked any questions about it. So I'll stand down
sounds
on
like
that.
everything's going fine with it.
Not our business. Yep, you didn't ask about it.
Yeah.
All right. So we are going to take our second break. And when we come back, we're going to discuss hopelessness. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's second Theraproducer sponsor is Dr. Ben Don. Today's second trivia question in honor of Theraproducer Ben is...
a golf ball.
Oh, close. This female American golfer became the youngest player to qualify for a USGA Amateur Championship at the age of 10. and turned pro shortly before her 16th birthday. She won her first major at the 2014 U.S. Women's Open.
Arnold Palmer.
Arnold Palmer, 2 for 2.
Nailed it.
If you'd like to join Ben Don and make the show possible, you can go to patreon.com/therapy. And thanks for signing up.
So women's golf. That's cool.
I wanted to do one male golf.
Yeah, women play golf, Jim.
Yeah.
Hey,
They're
whoa.
able to do that.
Everybody
now.
calm down.
Hey, Jim, they can also vote.
Have they made any good drinks? That's what I care about. Call me whenever they pioneer
whatever. Chauvinist.
blending together lemonade and iced tea.
Chauvinist.
Okay, let's just talk about the women's suffrage thing again. I don't feel like we all kind of came to the same page. You guys see what I'm seeing on this, though, right? Like the suffrage thing. Can you believe it? You see it, right? We're all on the same page. We're all friends here.
I don't even remember what that joke was.
The joke was that...
No, I don't care.
Okay.
You misunderstood.
You misunderstood what I was saying. All right. Hi, Jim. Hi, Nick. I have no light or friendly introduction today, so here goes the word vomit. From the waist down, I feel numb. This is one of those fear responses we can't really explain, but everyone knows and feels their version of it. Up till now, today had been a more successful day in terms of managing my sadness, but now I have a horrible eye twitch and a desperate need to write. The borders might be closed for Brazilians for an indefinite amount of time. It's happening worldwide to some extent, but I was informed a few minutes ago about the restriction to enter the U.S. for who knows how long, specifically blocking people from Brazil. We not only have to be here, but we also cannot escape if we have the means to. Not that this is our biggest problem by far. This is just a little bit more of lighter fluid thrown into this dumpster fire of a situation right when we think the flames are starting to diminish. Nonetheless, it hits me hard every time I'm reminded of how fucking helpless I am. So why did I leave? This question haunts me. Whenever I planned to go visit Indiana, I was fully aware that I would have to come back. But for some reason, part of me decided I was staying as soon as my feet stepped out of the plane in Chicago. There was almost an alien voice inside of my head trying to convince me to hear it, to trust it, to understand that this was the time to do the unthinkable and stay. I had no idea what was about to happen. I got bombarded with questions and information for 2 weeks, everyone trying to put solely on me the ultimate decision to either stay or fly back to Brazil. And I was just trying to have someone else decide for me or to let me and make me stay. I never wanted to leave. I was desperately looking for a way to stay. I failed. Those days before my flight back were worse than I expected. The moment we parked at O'Hare and I knew I had to go thousands and thousands of miles away, I felt physical pain. I couldn't move. It feels like March was a year ago, and still the days go by so fast now. I was so happy that I can't understand why I did not follow my heart and stay. I know it would have been really hard. There were a lot of factors in the equation, and I had no control over most of them. So how come I blame myself each day when I wake up here, but and feel that I'm wasting my life waiting? This regret never leaves me, not for a second. I keep thinking I should have done more, I should have fought harder, I should have prepared myself better, and I hate that I was incapable to do everything. I don't even know how I could have done to prevent this. Even now, while I write this, I can't understand why. Sure, there is a lot of real-life problems involved in this, including my ability to buy my medication, for example, so I can reason myself out of this loop of despair when I need to, but I still think I was fucking weak, and I would have found a way. Now it's too late. I'm not there anymore. I'm trapped here, and I have to deal with that too. Wherever we look, all we see is pain. My family tries to comfort me, saying that we are all okay and safe, but that is also a big load of bullshit. I had to tell them that the reality of our country is that people will die. Whoever has to die will die, because we have no one to count on. There is no effort to prevent casualties. This is a now brutal self-preservation game. Our family is lucky because we get to stay home as much as possible, since most of us are either working from home or retired. The most we can do is try to check on them and our friends and tell them just to stay safe. Other than that, no hope at all. We are just watching the demise of a nation, burying more by the thousand every day. Then why did I come back? What was the purpose of coming back to this broken place? I am broken, and I am tired. I am sad, but I am angry. I am also a stubborn bitch who will never let them win. So now I need you guys to tell me how to keep on going. Why to keep on going? How do I overcome this regret that is probably the biggest regret of my life? Thank you for everything. Stay safe, Manu.
Hey, Manu.
Gosh. So Manu's in Brazil. Manu visited America and went to Indiana and spent some time out here. She went back right as the global pandemic thing was really sweeping up. And it was a hard decision for her. She was unsure if that was even a safe decision, but the law being what it was and the circumstances of her life being what they were, she felt like she had to go back to Brazil. Brazil has become a festering hellhole for the pandemic. It is fast becoming one of the worst casualty nations in the world. The process of quarantine and protecting people was completely abandoned there. The president there is very, very powerful and kind of can do whatever he wants. And there's also been a lot of lockdowning. America said anybody from Brazil is not welcome here anymore. And that's because it's so dangerous and the pandemic is so rife. So whenever your life feels like it's spinning out of control, and whenever you feel trapped and you feel a sense of regret that you've made decisions that ultimately put you in a worse spot than you could have been, feel like you jumped right in front of the train as it was coming, how do you cope with that? How do you answer that question of how do you keep going on?
Well, first of all, you have to stop living in the past.
Yeah.
The past is a shitty place to live in.
Yeah, right.
And I think as long as you're constantly looking at, I should have done this, I should have done that, I shouldn't have done this, okay.
Yeah.
Great. What good does that do you? Like,
right.
Okay, it's done now. There's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Continuing to dwell on it is not going to make it any easier to cope with. It's just, we really need to focus on where we are right now, present moment. Because the other really harmful thing about going back and constantly second guessing yourself is that you're assuming that you know now what would have worked out better. And sometimes we can imagine that and it seems logical. Well, now knowing what I know, I would have done this. Well, but you're still, that's only your best guess right now. You don't know that it would have worked out any better, right? I mean, that's the danger of constantly looking back and kind of living in the past.
Yeah.
It's never going to be helpful. You can't say that you would be in a better situation than you are now. Maybe, but maybe not. We don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know. There's nothing, I guess, to be scientific about it, there's no good data there.
I remember reading a quote that said something to the effect of, to think upon the past is depression, to think upon the future is anxiety, to think upon the now is to be at peace.
Right.
And I think that there's some truth to that.
Jim Jobin.
Wayne Gretzky, Jim Jobin. And so I think that if you look at it like that, Manu, yes, I think you're allowed to mourn what happened. I think that you're allowed to mourn the global apocalypse. I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you had no way of knowing accurately what was going to happen. You had guesses. They were pessimistic. It turns out reality matched your pessimism. That's not usually the case. In this case, it is. And you're kicking yourself because you feel like, well, I called it. I knew it was going to be this bad. I hated, the way my country was going to handle things. I didn't trust my government. And now look at how bad it is. I think you're allowed to mourn that. I think you're allowed to feel that sense of regret and that sense of sadness. But I'll tell you the same thing that we tell people who are recovering from addiction. Looking at the catastrophe of your past does not empower you in the present. You have to stay in the now. Just for today, you're safe. Just for today, as John said last week, there's enough food in the pantry. Just for today, your family is safe. And just for today, you're going to be okay. And yeah, you're looking out the window and on the TV and you're seeing terrific and horrible scenes and terrible tragedy. And it's hard not to internalize that. It's hard not to attach to that. It's hard not to be affected by that. And I'm not asking you to not be affected by that, but I am asking you to stay in your truth, to stay in the now. And to also be very wary of not looking too much into the future with too much predictive power to tell yourself it will never this, that, or the other thing. It will always this, that, or the other thing. That's not true. And the last thing I would say to you is, and this is true of anybody out there who's struggling, the one thing I want people to come back to is to remember that you, as a human being, have overcome tremendous things in your story. You have navigated really difficult obstacles, things that at the time you thought were going to overwhelm you, things that you did not feel that you were equipped to surpass when they were happening, and yet you did. Here you are today. And whatever you're facing today, whatever situation is in front of you today, you need to remember who you are. And you need to remember that same person that has overcome amazing obstacles in the past can overcome these obstacles today. And that one day in the future you will look back on this and think, my God, that was so hard, that was so terrible. But I endured. if you can endure, the world will change. Change is inevitable. It is happening always around us and through us and among us, and if we will just stay where we are and get through it, change will ultimately happen. The world will come back to where it needs to be, and your life is going to look better in the future than it does now. Hold on to that. Sometimes it's all we can hold on to.
So I watched, last night, I watched the movie Jojo Rabbit.
Yes.
Which, in our pre-show, we discussed that Jim doesn't actually think is a real movie.
I really hope it is.
I can't believe you've never heard of this movie. Anyway, at the end of the movie, they talk a lot about this German poet. Do you know what I'm talking about, Jacob?
Yeah, I don't remember the name though.
Okay, because I know the name, I cannot pronounce it. It's Rilke.
Okay.
But it's not Rilke or Reich.
I think it's Ulrike.
No, it's it's German, but okay. I can't remember how to actually pronounce it. But they end the movie, at the very end, they actually have this poem that they were talking about in the movie. And the poem it says, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going." I'm sorry. Yeah. I just completely fucked up the entire poem. "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." And I think it was a really powerful way to look at things. Like, we have to, in the present moment, we can't just take good things.
Right.
Like, we have to, part of that mindfulness and just being open and being in the present is experiencing everything and just accepting everything.
Right.
It just is.
It just is.
That's just how it is right now. And I think how we cope with that is exactly like what you were talking about with kind of what John said last week. Like, do I have something to eat today?
Just for today.
Yeah, I got something to eat today. Do I have a place to live today?
Just for
yes,
today.
I got that. Okay, my basics are covered.
Yep.
Everything else is extra, right? And if we can just kind of take that approach and just say, okay, what today, this is all I need to do. I had a client once use this analogy, and it was really good. He was talking about his recovery, and he was doing amazingly well. And I kind of asked him, I was like, so what's kind of your technique? What's your approach? And he's like, I kind of had this enlightenment where I figured out the difference between all the stuff I can control and all the things I can't. And he used a fishbowl example. He's like, I got this fishbowl and it's full of water, and all I have to do is just make sure that I don't spill the water.
That's the
and
one
I just
thing
hold
I have.
it. That's
right.
That's it,
Yeah.
And everything else that's going around, my boss getting angry and yelling at me, or somebody, cutting me off on the highway, or all this stuff. It's just these things flying around the room.
Right.
And they're not hitting me.
Right. But they're happening.
But they're distracting.
Yeah.
It's really hard to not focus on them.
Right.
But if I can just focus on holding this fish bowl and not spilling the water, I'm going to be okay. So that's what he would do every day. That's kind of his way of centering,
right,
is to just focus on, okay, well, for today, this is all I need to do.
Just for today.
Right.
And that's the thing, Manu. Come back to, what do I need to do today? And that might be right. That might be weep. That might be mourn. That might be listen to music. That might be read something. But you're going to get through this one day at a time. And you just got to tell yourself the truth. But thanks for writing in, my friend, and we wish you well. We know that that's a really hard place to be in the world.
Yeah, I've been watching the news. It's like,
it's really hard to watch.
It's tough. Things are tough down there.
But we're rooting for you.
Yeah.
Well, here at the end of the show, we do want to thank all of our new Therapals and Theropods and Theraproducers and Therodactyls. Quick random note, we won't dive into it, but I'm writing a book, and I've got my proof copy right here. Woo! It's right in front of me. So I've got the almost final draft. I'm changing some things in here. But sticking to my SMART goals, guys. When we started this year, we all set goals. Mine was to publish this damn book. I'm almost there. I'm really, really close. So
good for you.
Keeping it out there. Just reminding people to work on your goals, because I'm working on mine, damn it.
On that note.
No one is more surprised than everyone who's listening.
On that note, I move to bring back book club.
Yeah. Just in time for my new book.
Dad Vice will be the next one we tear apart.
Well, we want to thank our new Therapal. Thanks, Take It EV podcast. Oh, that's cool. So everybody go check out Take It EV podcast, because they gave us $1.
Absolutely.
That was the cheapest advertisement you've ever bought. Take it, Evie. Want to thank our new all of our Theropods. Is the beginning of the month. You're hearing this in the beginning of June. Want to thank Adam Rabiznik, Andrew Frozen Cusser, Angie Ellis, Brad Kefauver, Carolyn Albert, Chelsea Lamb, Chelsea Saracen, Corey Owens, Craig Little, Curtis Kiwi Fruit Scoop Hanlon, David Sorensen, Don Dorr, Elliot H. Lamb, E.Z. Whip, Ezekiel Lawrence, Felicia Butler, Fred Bashara Jr., Gavin Bristow, Heather Psychotic Scoop Crace, Hylian Scoop, Ian Whitefall, James Cole, Jeffrey Ackerman, Scoopy Jess, Jim Hunter, John DeLong, Joseph Pangrazio, Carrie Terhark, a.k.a. Nick's sister, Katie Chiwilkowski. Nailed it. Kenneth Liu, Kenneth Soto, Lauren Izzo, In the Hizzo, Lori Eltzroth, Linda Brandmeier, Lindsay Bashara, Matthew Nair, Malaya, Okie Scoop, Richard Bruins, Robert Paulson, Scoopaholic, Scoopadur Ascending, Scoop Shernot, Shayla Bullock, Stacy Westerlin, Tess Miller, Three Scoops a Lady, Todd Canfield, and Tracy Replogle, a.k.a. my mom.
And thank you to all of our Therodactyls. Thank you, Andrea Anderson, Brian Lehman, Dan Martin, David Polak, Ice Blue Scoop, Kate Keller, Leon Kassab, Mason Miller, Sally Boop Scoop, Scott Brady, Tom Morrison, and Cindy Ash.
And we want to welcome back Gray Whitaker.
Welcome back.
Oh, yeah. He's like, somebody stole my seat. Welcome back, Gray. Glad to have you. He's so funny. He's like, somebody stole all the TheraProducer seats, but you have to take my money anyway. We will, buddy, and we'll put it to use for good mental health stuff. But welcome back to the team. And we also want to thank our Elite Eight, the mysterious and shrouded Illuminati members of our fan club. Thank you, Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, chairman of the board, Robert Brownie Jr. Mint, Kayla Lansbury, Ellie O'Dare, Judy Schneider, Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop, Dr. Ben Dawn, and ex officio board members, Crazy Banana Scoop, and of course, welcome back, Gray Whitaker.
And if you'd like to hear this episode uncut and unedited and enjoy our spontaneous projects like Book Club, go to patreon.com/therapy, and thank you for supporting mental health.
That's all the time we've got for this week's session. We want to thank our landlords, the Ice Cream Social Podcast, and thanks to those of you who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Share this episode with someone who needs it by opening this episode's description in your podcast app and copying and pasting that link we provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter at podtherapyguys, and at patreon.com/therapy.
If you want to submit a question to the show, ask anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tanchman.
Jojo Rabbit.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.
I can't believe that he believed that was a real movie.
Oh, shit, it's not? Oh, God damn it! I want to